My engagement, which I thought would be the happiest chapter of my life, turned into a nightmare orchestrated by my fiancée and her family. At 28, I never imagined finding myself in this situation, needing to share this story. Looking back, the warning signs were there, subtle hints I chose to ignore, blinded, as they say, by love. It can make you incredibly foolish. I was head over heels for a woman, 26 years old, who I believed was the one. We had been dating for about 18 months and everything seemed perfect. She was intelligent, beautiful, and we had an undeniable connection. We came from different cultural backgrounds. I was born and raised in America while she had different roots. I initially thought that was part of what made us so special, so interesting. How utterly naive I was. Let me give you a little background. My parents immigrated to the United States in their 20s, chasing the American dream, and they achieved it. They supported me when I moved out at 19, helped me through college, and instilled in me the importance of independence. A pretty standard American upbringing, right? My fiancé, on the other hand, came from a culture where living with your parents wasn't just common, it was the expected norm even after marriage. When she first mentioned the possibility, I genuinely thought she was joking. Living with my in-laws? That's when the first real argument erupted. Or, more accurately, when she delivered a passionate monologue about respecting cultural differences and how this was a non-negotiable aspect of her family dynamic. Maybe I was trying to be too accommodating, but I made it clear that I wasn't comfortable with the idea. Her apartment was already small enough, barely enough space for her and her parents. It was a two-bedroom place that felt overcrowded as it was. She presented her parents as temporary guests at her apartment. In retrospect, that should have been a major red flag, the way she phrased things, the subtle equivocations. But love, as it often does, clouded my judgment, leading me to compromise on things I never thought I would. After weeks of discussion, she presented a seemingly reasonable solution. Just try it for a few months, she suggested. If you're not comfortable, we can move out. It sounded fair enough, didn't it? I agreed, wanting to be the understanding partner, to show her that I respected her culture and her family. Her parents seemed genuinely lovely when I first met them. Her mother would cook these incredible traditional dishes and her father would attempt to bond with me over sports, despite his obvious lack of knowledge about American football. They were putting on an Oscar-worthy performance and I was their captive audience. Those first few days after moving in were strange. On the surface, everything seemed fine. They smiled at me during breakfast, asked about my day during dinner, and generally played the part of the perfect future in-laws. But there was an underlying tension, a feeling I couldn't quite decipher. You know the feeling when you walk into a room and the conversation abruptly stops? Multiply that by 100. The apartment was even more cramped than I had anticipated. My fiancée and I shared her old bedroom, which barely fit a queen-sized bed and a dresser. Her parents had the master bedroom and the living room became this awkward shared space where no one felt entirely at ease. The walls were paper-thin, amplifying every cough, every movement. Privacy became a mythical concept, a fantasy I would escape into in my thoughts at night. But the most unsettling aspect, the thing that should have sent me running for the hills, was the constant conversations in their native language. Now, I'm not one of those people who demand everyone speak English in America. Not at all. But when you're living in close quarters and three people are constantly having conversations you can't understand, it begins to wear you down. I did try to be understanding. I repeatedly asked my fiancée to teach me her language. Wouldn't that solve so many problems? I could understand her culture better, communicate with her parents, and finally feel like I belonged in my future family. Yet every time I asked, she'd wave it off with some excuse. It's too difficult, she'd say. Or, don't worry about it. We can all speak English. Looking back, I wish I'd pushed harder. But at the time, I was just trying to make things work, trying to be understanding, trying to be the supportive partner who could bridge cultural gaps and make our relationship thrive. It felt like those scenes in movies when someone enters a room and everyone suddenly drops their voices to whispers. Only in my life, the whispers were in a language I couldn't decipher. Picture this. I'd come home from my demanding job in tech, completely drained. They'd be in the living room, deep in conversation in their native tongue. The moment I walked in, her mom would get this subtle look on her face, like she'd been caught gossiping but was trying to act innocent. My fiancé would quickly switch to English, asking about my day with a bright, almost forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. So, I started taking online language classes in secret. I know, shady, right? But after she'd repeatedly dismissed my requests to learn their language, it felt awkward bringing it up again. Plus, I have to admit, a small part of me wanted to understand what they were saying when they thought I couldn't. Petty maybe, but those weird vibes were getting stronger and stronger. The classes were basic, greetings, numbers, simple phrases. But I managed to pick up a few key words. The one that kept cropping up was, "Get it done." Her mom would say it to her constantly, always with this urgent tone that made me uneasy. When I'd look at them questioning, they'd just smile and brush it off. This is where things started to feel really unsettling. I started noticing a pattern. Every time my fiancé and I would talk about money or our future plans, her mom would suddenly need to have an important conversation with her, in their language, of course. These important discussions always left my fiancé looking stressed and her mom looking, well, almost triumphant. One incident stands out. I was talking about buying a house after the wedding. I had some savings and a stable job, and suddenly her mom practically dragged my fiancé into the kitchen for one of their private chats. I could hear their voices rising, but of course I couldn't understand a word. When they came back, my fiancé immediately started asking about joint bank accounts and whether I'd considered adding her name to my existing accounts. The honeymoon planning, or lack thereof, was another huge red flag. Every time I brought it up, my fiancé would have some excuse, "Work is crazy right now," or "Let's wait until we sort out the living situation." Yet, she had no problem planning other things, like how to combine our finances or whether I'd consider adding her name to the lease of my rental property. Yes, I own a rental property. And no, I hadn't told her about it yet. I tried talking to my parents, but they were so focused on being supportive of our multicultural relationship that they kept making excuses for her. "It's just cultural differences," my mom would say. "Give it time," my dad would add. But my gut was screaming that something was wrong. The worst part was I started feeling like I was losing my mind. You know that feeling when you're the only one who can see something's wrong, but everyone else is acting like everything's normal? That was my life. I'd catch these quick glances between my fiancée and her mom, hear snippets of conversations that would abruptly stop when I entered the room, notice how they'd switch to English mid-sentence when they realized I was within earshot. I started documenting everything. Paranoid, maybe, but I began keeping a journal of all the unsettling incidents, the times her mom would ask oddly specific questions about my income, the way my fiancé would avoid any conversation about her immigration status, how they'd have these intense conversations in their language that would suddenly cut off when I walked in. At work, I started working longer hours just to avoid going home. My coworkers noticed the change in me. "You don't seem as happy as you used to be," one of them told me. If only they could glimpse the chaos swirling inside my head. Living in this situation has turned me into my own worst enemy, constantly questioning my perceptions. Was I unfairly biased, letting my anxieties get the best of me? Perhaps the stress of the engagement was making me see threats where none existed. But then something would happen, like catching my future mother-in-law abruptly closing a notebook as I entered the room, or my fiancé becoming strangely evasive when I inquired about her childhood in America, and the doubts would come crashing down. I remember how my future mother-in-law constantly uttered "get it done" in their native tongue. About 2 months into this cohabitation experiment, things escalated significantly. Their private conversations shifted from merely suspicious to openly hostile. My future mother-in-law wasn't just saying it anymore, she was practically spitting it at my fiancé when she assumed I wasn't listening. One night, I was working late in our bedroom, the thin walls doing me no favors, and I could clearly hear them arguing in the kitchen. My future mother-in-law's voice rose in volume with each passing moment. Even though my fiancé repeatedly tried to quiet her, the only discernible words were "get it done" and what sounded like "bank" in their language. When I went out to get some water, they both froze, startled, like deer caught in headlights. My fiancé quickly explained that they were discussing wedding preparations at 11 p.m. Right? The next day, my fiancé started exhibiting strange behavior regarding my phone. She would peer over my shoulder as I was texting, posing seemingly innocent yet pointed questions about my banking apps. "Oh, you do all your banking on your phone? That's so convenient. Are you ever concerned about security?" Then she suggested we should share our passwords, since we were getting married anyway. No. This is where things became truly unsettling. I caught her rummaging through my work bag one morning. She feigned innocence, claiming she was searching for gum, but I'm not easily fooled. My work laptop was in there, along with some financial documents I had brought home for review. When I confronted her, she dissolved into tears, accusing me of not trusting her and questioning how I could suspect her of snooping when she was merely looking for gum. Classic Darvo. The pressure surrounding the joint bank account was reaching unbearable levels. Every day, she'd find a way to broach the subject. "My friend just opened a joint account with her fiancé. It's so romantic, or don't you think it would be easier to plan the wedding if we combined our finances?" When I stated my preference to wait until after the wedding, her mom would launch into rapid-fire conversation in their language, and my fiancé would look as though she were on the verge of a panic attack. I also began noticing other peculiar details, such as the complete absence of mail addressed to them at the apartment. None. Zero. In the 2 months I'd been living there, I never saw a single piece of mail bearing their names. When I casually mentioned this, my future father-in-law mumbled something about paperless billing and quickly changed the subject. Then there was the incident involving my fiancé's childhood photos. She had always maintained that she grew up here in America, correct? Well, one day I asked to see some of her old school pictures. She became visibly flustered and claimed that they were all lost during a move. However, later that week, I overheard her yelling at her mom in their language about the photos. When I entered the room, they both fell silent so abruptly that I thought they might have strained their necks. My future mother-in-law was also becoming increasingly aggressive with her timeline. I kept overhearing snippets like, "before he finds out," and "running out of time" in their conversations. Remember those language classes I was taking? Well, they were starting to prove useful in the worst possible way. I wasn't fluent by any means, but I was picking up enough vocabulary to realize that something was seriously amiss. The wedding planning process was essentially a constant parade of red flags. My fiancé was insistent on having a quick courthouse ceremony. Whenever I mentioned wanting a real wedding with family and friends, she would become incredibly anxious and start speaking with her mom in their language. The next day, I just knew the excuses would start. Excuses about why a lavish wedding suddenly seemed like a terrible idea. Too much money, maybe, or the classic, "let's put that towards a house." The house we were suddenly supposed to be desperately saving for. Sleep became a luxury. Each night, I lay awake, acutely aware of their hushed conversations drifting from the living room, those whispers they thought I couldn't hear. More than once, my name would surface in the quiet, followed by what sounded like suppressed arguments. When she eventually slipped into bed, later and later each night, thinking I was already asleep, I could feel her restlessness beside me, the constant checking of her phone. The breaking point was undeniably the notebook. I found it hidden, tucked away in the back of our closet. Pages filled with scribbled handwriting in their language. Numbers were the only thing that jumped out, big numbers, and then, starkly, my own name. When I confronted her about it, she practically yanked it away, a flimsy explanation about it being wedding budget drafts falling from her lips. But the raw panic that flashed in her eyes, that was the moment I knew. I had to find out what was really going on. After finding the notebook, I knew I couldn't just sit by and wait for her to reveal the truth. I needed tangible evidence. Thankfully, my background in tech provided an option. I had a serviceable voice recorder app sitting on my phone, ready to be deployed. I'm not particularly proud of what came next, but I felt I had no other choice. I started discreetly recording their conversations, moments when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The initial recordings were completely pointless. Just the usual everyday chatter, dinner plans, complaints about the weather. Then came that night. Yes, it deserves all the emphasis. I got home from work unexpectedly early. A meeting had been canceled last minute. As I approached our apartment door, I was met with the unmistakable sound of an argument, a full-blown screaming match. Instead of walking in, I froze, hitting record on my phone. Her mother was completely unhinged. Her voice was deafening. I'm honestly surprised the neighbors didn't call the police. My fiancé was crying. I could hear it, a muffled, heart-wrenching sound coming through the door. I could sense the sheer intensity even without understanding the majority of their words. But that phrase, "get it done?" I did understand that. And her mother was practically shrieking it. I stood there, rooted to the spot, for almost 15 minutes just recording. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my phone, like, twice. The only words I could clearly make out were bank, green card, and something about time running out. My heart was pounding in my chest so violently that I was convinced they would hear it through the closed door. Finally, I took a deep breath, stopped the recording, and walked into the apartment, trying to act as if everything was perfectly normal. The silence that followed was deafening. My fiancé was in the kitchen, obviously attempting to conceal the fact that she'd been crying. Her mother was seated at the dining table, her face flushed and red from yelling. They both looked at me as if they'd seen a ghost. "Everything all right?" I asked, attempting to project an air of nonchalance. My fiancé forced a smile and said they were merely finalizing wedding plans, right? Because everyone cries and screams about flower arrangements. That night, sleep completely evaded me. I kept replaying the recording, desperately attempting to decipher any familiar words, but I knew I needed assistance. Then I remembered Emma, not her real name, a coworker. She shared the same nationality as my fiancé, a fact I had never divulged to anyone at home. The following day at work, I cornered Emma during her lunch break. My hands were damp with nervous sweat as I approached her desk. "Hey, can I ask you something a little strange?" She looked up from her salad, undoubtedly assuming I needed help with some obscure coding problem. "I know this is odd, but do you happen to speak their language?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of recognition, and she nodded. That was when I admitted that I needed assistance translating something. I intentionally avoided providing any context initially. I just asked if she would be willing to listen to a short recording. We slipped into an empty conference room. My hands trembled so violently I could barely tap the play button on my phone. As the recording began, I watched Emma's face. First curiosity, then a dawning concern, and finally outright horror spread across her features. About halfway through, she grabbed my arm. "Stop it," she urged, her face drained of color. "Who are these people?" When I told her it was my fiancé and her mother, she looked like she was about to be physically ill. "You need to get out of there," she insisted today, "and call the police." I forced a nervous laugh, thinking she was overreacting. She wasn't laughing at all. "This isn't a joke," she said, her voice tight. "They're planning something truly awful." Then she began to translate word for excruciating word. With each sentence, I felt the foundations of my reality crumbling beneath me. The green card scheme was just the beginning, the mere surface of something far more sinister. Their plan was to drain my accounts completely once they had access. The notebook I had stumbled upon wasn't just scribbled notes, it was a meticulously detailed list of all my assets they had managed to uncover. The worst part, the phrase that my future mother-in-law kept screeching about getting done? It was about ensuring my fiancé's name was legally attached to my accounts before I could discover the truth about her immigration status, and so much more. It turned out my fiancé wasn't just concealing her immigration status, she was hiding an entire history, a pattern of similar scams. I just sat there in that sterile conference room, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Emma kept anxiously asking if I was all right, but how do you even begin to respond when you discover your entire relationship, the foundation of your life, has been nothing but an elaborate con? That the woman you loved, the woman you thought loved you back, had been playing you from day one? "Let me break down the full conversation," she translated. "Prepare yourself, because it spirals into something truly unbelievable." My future mother-in-law wasn't just angry, she was in a full-blown panic because their whole carefully constructed timeline was collapsing. "This is what they were arguing about. I can't pressure him about the joint account anymore." My fiancé's voice was tight with frustration. "He's already starting to suspect something. We're running out of time," her mother snapped. "Your visitor visa expires in 3 months. Do you want to go back empty-handed after all the effort we put into finding him?" "You think I don't know that?" she retorted. "But he's not like the others. He actually checks his accounts every day. He works in tech, for God's sake. He's not stupid." "Then you need to try harder. Why do you think we chose him in the first place? Have you seen his house? The rental property? We didn't spend 6 months meticulously tracking his finances for you to get cold feet now." 6 months. They had been watching me, studying me, for 6 months before we even met. That cute little coffee shop where we had our first date? It wasn't a chance encounter. They knew my routine. They knew I stopped there every Tuesday and Thursday before work. But wait, it gets worse. Emma's hands were shaking even harder as she translated the next part. "Saved for another sister, managed to get everything wrapped up in 4 months with her target." Her mother's voice dripped with scorn. "Why is it taking you so long?" "Because her guy was a complete idiot," my fiancé shot back. "This one has everything locked down. I can't even crack his phone password." "Then find it," her mother hissed. "Drug his drink if you have to. We need access to his accounts before the wedding." Emma stopped translating abruptly and just looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pity. "There's more," she said softly. "But are you sure you really want to hear it?" I swallowed hard and nodded. I needed to know everything, had to. Fragments of their conversation echoed in my head, chilling me to the bone. His voice, so recently filled with promises, now sounded like a stranger's. "What if he finds out about the others, about Detroit?" he'd said. "Then her, his mother, he won't. That idiot never pressed charges. He was too embarrassed about falling for it, just like the others." Others? The word hung in the air, a sickening revelation. Detroit. A place, a past, a pattern. Suddenly, I wasn't unique, not special, just another mark. Emma's words, carefully chosen, were still a brutal assessment. Targets. That's how they saw the men they preyed on. But the cruelest blow came from the words I overheard him say. When his mother questioned his wavering commitment, he responded with chilling pragmatism. "Why do you think I agreed to marry him?" he'd said, his voice laced with disdain. Have you seen his house? It's huge. He doesn't know I don't have a green card. I'll have to play along, make him think I'm still into him. We're engaged now, but we need to wait to make our move. He's loaded. We just need to be patient. Loaded. The word stung. I wasn't wealthy. I was a software developer with a stable job and a hard-earned nest egg. But the rental property I poured my heart and soul into that represented years of sacrifice and careful planning, it had transformed me in their eyes into a walking, talking cash machine. Emma filled in the blanks, relaying more of the conversation she had heard. This wasn't just about securing a green card, it was a carefully orchestrated family enterprise. The blueprint was disturbingly precise: identify single men with some financial stability and few close family ties, discreetly gather information about their assets, orchestrate a seemingly chance encounter orchestrated by him or one of his sisters. Then execute the plan, phase by phase, rush into an engagement, subtly push for joint bank accounts, expedite the wedding, drain the accounts dry, vanish without a trace. In that sterile conference room, the world tilted. I felt faint, nauseous. Emma repeatedly asked if I needed water, offered to call someone. But who do you call when your entire relationship, the foundation of your life, crumbles into a pile of calculated lies? Then came the Detroit bombshell, a detail casually dropped that resonated with terrifying clarity. They've done this before recently. They mentioned something about a guy in Detroit who almost caught them. They had to leave in the middle of the night. That's probably why they're rushing now. The pieces fell into place: the insistence on shared accounts, the secretive notebook filled with cryptic financial details, the deliberate effort to keep me ignorant of their language, the relentless pressure to have a quick, simple courthouse wedding. They weren't just after a green card, they were after everything I had. After that conversation with Emma, I was a wreck. My hands trembled uncontrollably, making it impossible to focus, and I was gripped by waves of nausea that sent me racing to the restroom. Emma, a true friend, covered for me, telling our boss I'd succumbed to food poisoning and needed to go home. But home was the last place I wanted to be. Not to our apartment. Not to them. Desperate, I dialed my dad. In retrospect, it was the best decision I made. The conversation, etched in my memory, unfolded like this: me, Dad, I need help, like right now. Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay? Me, voice cracking, the engagement. It's all fake. They're trying to scam me. Dad, a long, heavy silence. I'm on my way. Don't go home. Meet me at the local diner. I waited at that diner for what felt like an eternity, jumping at every sound, every movement. My dad arrived, accompanied by my mom, who had left work early, and my uncle, a police officer. Thank God for group texts. I played them the recording and the rough translation that Emma had emailed me. My mom broke down in tears. My dad's expression was dark, thunderous. My uncle immediately shifted into professional mode, firing off questions about timelines, documentation, and anything that seemed even slightly out of place. Now the stakes were raised. We needed to retrieve my belongings from the apartment, but we had to proceed with extreme caution. My uncle's advice was to do it while she was at work, but I knew her mom would be there. Waiting wasn't an option. My uncle was convinced they'd destroy evidence if they suspected I knew anything. So we strategized. My dad and uncle agreed to come along for support. My mom insisted on being involved somehow, so she volunteered to wait in the car as a lookout. The plan was simple: get in, retrieve my belongings, document everything meticulously, and avoid any confrontation. When we arrived at the apartment, her dad was there, not her mom. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me standing there with my dad and uncle. He tried to block us from entering, insisting we had to wait for my fiancé. My uncle flashed his badge. He was off duty but still had it. Sir, he said, his voice firm, I suggest you step aside. The next 20 minutes are a blur of adrenaline and controlled chaos. I focused on the essentials, grabbing my important documents first. Luckily, I had kept those locked in a box in our closet. Then I moved on to clothes, electronics, anything I could think of that rightfully belonged to me. My dad was methodically photographing everything we took, a smart precaution in case they tried to accuse me of theft later. Her dad was frantically trying to make calls, probably to my fiancé or his wife, but no one answered. He followed us around the apartment, alternating between pleading and making barely veiled threats in broken English. You don't understand, he kept repeating. This is all a misunderstanding. Right? The only misunderstanding was me believing their daughter's affection was real. Meanwhile, my phone was exploding with texts from my fiancé. Where are you? Why aren't you at work? Are you really taking your things? Please answer me. Whatever you think you know, it's not true. We need to talk. But my uncle had warned me beforehand not to respond to anything. Document everything, save every message, but absolutely do not engage. The final straw came while we were packing. Her dad received a call and couldn't manage to take it to another room in time. It was her sister, the one who'd successfully scammed that guy in Detroit. Her voice was clear through the speaker. Did he find the papers? Make sure he doesn't find the papers. My dad had to physically restrain me from tearing the apartment apart looking for whatever these papers were. My uncle reminded me that we already had ample evidence with the recording. As we were leaving, her dad made one last desperate attempt. Please, we can work this out. She loves you. Think about her future. My dad, usually so calm and quiet, a man I'd never heard raise his voice, turned around and said, the only future you need to think about is the one where you're explaining this to federal authorities. We drove straight to my uncle's precinct to file a report and then to my parents' house where my mom stress-baked 3 batches of cookies while simultaneously calling every wedding vendor to cancel our bookings. Thankfully, we hadn't paid any deposits yet. My dad's lawyer was the first person we called after that. That woman is an absolute force. The moment she heard the recording, she immediately recognized it as more than just a simple fraud case. She saw a whole criminal enterprise. Apparently, she'd handled a strikingly similar case 2 years prior in another state. And guess what? Same MO, different sister. It truly is a small world. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of stress and anxiety. My lawyer strongly advised complete radio silence with my ex and her family, a feat that proved more difficult than I anticipated. They tried everything to reach me, showing up unannounced at my parents' house, resulting in police intervention, calling from different numbers, having friends reach out on social media, and even sending a priest, who wasn't even of my religion, to try and talk to me. The silver lining through all this chaos was that they were completely unaware that we possessed the recording. They seemed to think I'd simply gotten cold feet or stumbled upon some minor inconsistency. Little did they know the surprise that awaited them. The investigation started small, just with my case. But then my lawyer started digging deeper. Remember that guy in Detroit my ex's sister had scammed? They tracked him down. Turns out I wasn't alone. There were others who had fallen prey to them, a doctor in Michigan back in 2018, an engineer in Texas the following year, a small business owner in Florida in 2020, and 3 more men who, initially, were too ashamed to even come forward. The pattern was chillingly consistent. First, target successful, unattached men. Next, rush the relationship towards engagement, then pressure for joint bank accounts, after that, attempt to gain access to their finances, and finally, vanish the moment they either struck gold or were about to be exposed. But the truly unsettling part? The investigators unearthed a notebook. I remember Dad trying to keep me from finding those papers. Well, they discovered them while executing a search warrant. It wasn't just notes about me, it was their entire playbook laid bare. Lists of potential victims accompanied by meticulous financial profiles, scripted lines for various situations if he asks about the green card, contact information for people who could forge documents, and even rankings of potential targets based on their estimated wealth. The notebook held everything, absolutely everything. They had been shadowing me for months before our supposed chance encounter. My regular coffee shop visits, the gym I frequented, my grocery shopping habits, even my blasted credit score, lists of my assets, and notes on my dating app preferences. Just reading through it made me feel physically ill. Every seemingly spontaneous meeting, every coincidental brush, every shared interest, all meticulously planned and orchestrated. They even had notes detailing the sports teams I followed so she could feign being a fan. And if that wasn't enough, it got worse. The investigators discovered a group chat where various family members exchanged advice on identifying and swindling targets. My ex was in there bragging about how she'd landed a big fish me and advising her cousins on how to identify promising marks. The legal proceedings were a grueling ordeal, yet strangely satisfying. Each time I thought we had uncovered everything, another layer of deceit would surface: a clandestine document forgery workshop in their basement, multiple sets of fabricated identification, hard drives filled with background checks on potential victims, and bank accounts scattered across 3 different countries. My lawyer was practically giddy. This isn't just standard fraud, she kept repeating. This is a full-blown RICO case. I had to Google what that meant: organized crime. The immigration authorities got involved when they realized the vast majority of their documentation was fraudulent. It turned out my ex hadn't grown up here, as she had claimed. She'd been entering and exiting the country on various visas using different aliases and falsified documents. The real shock? They found an actual training manual, a document explicitly detailing how to select vulnerable targets. Recently divorced men were preferred, manufacture organic meeting opportunities, quickly cultivate trust, accelerate the relationship towards engagement, secure access to their finances, and vanish without leaving a trace. My ex initially attempted to feign innocence, claiming that she genuinely loved me and that her family had coerced her into it. Then she tried to portray herself as a victim, too. Finally, when they presented her with the evidence, including that recording, the expression on her face was priceless. She immediately tried to negotiate a plea deal. I'm currently staying with my parents. After everything I've been through, I can finally say that it's over. The court proceedings concluded last month. The outcome? My ex-fiancé received a 3-year sentence in federal prison for fraud, followed by deportation. Her parents were immediately deported. They were here on expired visitor visas. Her siblings faced various charges predominantly related to document fraud. Honestly, watching them in court felt surreal. My ex tried to play the victim until the prosecutor played the recording. The look of realization that washed over her face when she understood that I had proof of everything? I won't deny that was gratifying. I didn't stay for the entire trial. My lawyer assured me that my presence wasn't required every day, and frankly, I had better ways to spend my time, like actually living my life. As for the restitution they were ordered to pay, I'm not holding my breath, but that's okay. Thanks to never opening that joint account and uncovering their scheme before the wedding, my finances are secure. The only thing I truly lost was time and trust, and I'm actively working on rebuilding the trust. Emma, my coworker who translated the recording, has become one of my dearest friends. She feels responsible for ruining my engagement, her words, but I constantly remind her that she saved my life. We sometimes grab coffee and laugh about how incredibly cautious I am about dating now. My parents have been incredibly supportive throughout this entire ordeal. Dad still occasionally apologizes for not recognizing their true nature sooner, but I reassure him that they fooled everyone. Mom has, mostly, stopped trying to set me up with nice girls from church, and they've both been incredibly supportive of me just focusing on myself for a while. Life feels genuinely good these days. I finally got that promotion at work, all those late nights paid off. And I've actually committed to learning Italian properly this time, enrolling in structured classes instead of just relying on apps. I also moved into a new apartment, a place that truly feels like home. Oh, and I adopted a dog, a scruffy terrier mix I named Leo. Seriously, best decision I've made in ages. He brings so much joy to my life. Looking back, that past relationship, though painful, taught me some hard-won lessons. The biggest one? To listen to my intuition. That nagging feeling I had, the one I kept dismissing, was right all along. I learned not to ignore those red flags, no matter how strong the initial infatuation is. I also realized the importance of maintaining financial independence, at least until you're absolutely certain about the future. And I definitely regret not prioritizing learning his native language sooner. It created a frustrating barrier between us. Ultimately, I've learned that it's perfectly acceptable to slow things down, to not rush into anything, even when pressure comes from outside or within. It's okay to take things at my own pace.